I'd like to ask about Taiwan.
Yes.
Now, there were a lot of heated words on Taiwan on both sides, including apparently in the meeting that took place, the first face-to-face meeting that took place between the Chinese defense minister and the US defense minister. Are you worried that under the Biden administration, the US is abandoning its policy of strategic ambiguity?
I am very concerned. You see, especially in the last few years. First of all, the Taiwan question is always the most sensitive, most important question between China and the United States. It concerns the political foundation of the entire relationship. Number two, as Minister Wei just said, Taiwan is part of China, is a Chinese province. So reunification, that's what we aim at. Of course, we are making the utmost efforts for peaceful reunification. But in the worst case scenario, if Taiwan really moves toward independence, we would have no other option but to use whatever force we have to prevent the separation of Taiwan from the country. That's clear. This is our consistent position. And I think Minister Wei just reiterated it in a very precise, very clear way. Then for the US policy, I could see important changes going on. For instance, how to deal with the Taiwan question. It was made very clear in the 3 joint communiques between China and the United States. And at the same time, they continue to sell arms to Taiwan. A couple of days ago, they announced a new sale of arms to Taiwan. And they are trying to upgrade political relations with the Taiwanese authorities. I think this is a very dangerous, very alarming development. They are making the political commitment some empty words. They are trying to turn it into empty words.
So Taiwan is sort of emblematic of the way the US-China relationship is being approached now. There have also been instances of what's been called in the media, at least, as wolf warrior diplomacy on the Chinese end. Now, this is the world's most important bilateral relationship. As a veteran diplomat, do you wish it was being approached differently? Can it be approached differently?
That's a label others try to put on us. I don't think this is a very accurate description, or this label is very good. It's certainly kind of a demonization of China's foreign policy. You see, relations between China and the United States are much more beyond just bilateral relations. This is very clear. We are fully aware of this. As I have told my American colleagues time and again, we have shared responsibility to the international community that we should manage this relationship in a constructive way. I still believe in that. Then in order to stabilize China-US relations, we have to handle the Taiwan question very carefully. I think the principle is already there, this one China principle. And the political foundation, the basis is also there, the 3 joint communiques. If both sides can stick to the principle, can abide by the commitments they made in the joint communiques, I would not anticipate major crisis.
US and China trade relations, business relations have always been very important. But now there is talk of decoupling, louder and louder talk of decoupling. In China, there is the talk of dual circulation economy and China's desire to be self-sufficient in many aspects. Now, how do you regard that? Are you optimistic about trade relations between these 2 nations in the long term?
I think the so-called decoupling is against the economic logic. It's certainly against the real interests of both the Chinese and the American people. This is quite clear. Look at the inflation rate right now in the United States. Part of the reason was the tariffs imposed by the previous administration on trade with China. It is hurting the American people themselves. So adding these political conditions to trade and mutual investment, try to decouple against the economic reality will hurt the interests of everybody. So we are against that. And we are really worried that there's mounting attempts in this regard. We have made this clear to the United States, and hopefully we can work together in a more practical and constructive way for mutual benefit.
If I could take you back some 10 years, when President Biden and President Xi were both vice presidents, and you accompanied them on this long trip to Beijing when Mr. Biden was visiting Beijing, and then you had the opportunity to observe them interact very closely. My question is, now that the two presidents have not had a chance to meet in person, what do you think about, the personal chemistry between, what are your observations between President Biden and President Xi? What is it like?
I think when leaders actually meet, they could have very good communication between them, face to face. And this kind of a communication and working relationship between the top leaders is a very important asset for the relationship. I always believe that. And it's very unfortunate for the last 2 years, or since President Biden became president, because of the pandemic, they could not meet in person. But still, they had a couple of phone calls, they had two video conferences. I just hope maybe in the near future there will be a possibility for them to see each other. They have known each other for many years. They have had very long and very substantive, very frank and friendly conversations in the past. I'm quite sure they will continue this kind of working with each other.
You've been China's longest-serving ambassador to the U.S., and you mentioned that you watched the Obama, Trump, and Biden presidencies. Which of these three presidencies has had the most rational approach or the best approach to relations with China?
Well, if I could be totally frank with you, I think America is moving in the step by step in the irrational direction as a whole. Before I left Washington, D.C., I had meetings with some of my American friends. Some of them are very much respected, very senior statesmen and diplomats. I shared my impression with them. I said, it seemed to me America today is a different country from 8 years ago when I first arrived. And they agreed. They agreed. You see, in the 1980s, I worked in the United Nations, but in New York. And in late 1980s, I studied in American school. I used to believe this is an open, optimistic, and self-confident country. But I become less and less sure.
So you described, or as it was then, open, optimistic, and self-confident. That was the US. So what words would you choose to describe China as of today?
We have a long tradition of civilization. I think the Chinese nation as a whole always values hard work and being modest and try to make friends, try to be open and inclusive. I think these values are still fully reflected in our foreign policy.
China and Singapore have had very long, cordial ties, and Singapore also has warm and good relations with the US. Now, in the context of this gap that's opened up between US and China, do you think Singapore could play a role in bridging that gap between US and China?
I think Singapore, and for that matter, the ASEAN as a whole, has played a very useful and a very constructive role. Not only help us to stabilize China-US relations, but also build up the momentum for regional cooperation. We appreciate that, and we hope you'll continue to do that. We have no problem whatsoever if other countries base their policies on their best interests, because we certainly believe we have common interests, we have shared interests. So we never want to force any other country to take side. If countries really have to take side, we hope all of us will take the same side. the right side of history.